So when someone sends me an article that's like, you see on Medium, it's like 15-minute read, 20-minute read, never going to read it. Unless it says TLDR at the top, and then I'm like, okay, cool, I'll look at the bullet points. so then I told myself, I was like, well, you know, I had an idea a while ago, I'm like, I really want to start summarizing articles, turn the text into speech, and be able to listen to it. And it wasn't until there was a hackathon from Product Hunt that I decided to take on that project. So what I do is I take articles and I summarize them, I convert that text into speech, again all serverless, AI, machine learning, that type of stuff. It's developed for a Product Hunt global hackathon, and I won the AI and ML category, which I got 100K in AWS credits, and I'm going to be in their Portfolio Plus program. It also had an Amazon skill, a Google Home skill. The goal at the beginning was to be completely serverless. I started to write like a Node.js API. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool, run on a server. Then I was like, I need to focus on serverless. So that was the goal, and that's like the whole piece I'm going to go over and talk about the multi-region stuff. And so we're going to start the initial rollout of our Web SDK for auto-summarizing blog posts and articles. So in the future, if you see something at the top of a blog post that summarizes it for you, you can listen to it. That will hopefully be our tool. And if you want to go to it, it's app.audify.fm. And I'll show you guys the tool too.
Question, does it have an API?
It does have an API, yeah.
So would you be against integrating it into Slack?
No, not at all.
All right.
Yeah. We can talk about that later. So this is what it looks like. Essentially, you know, a really simple app right now. You have your articles. You can search for different articles. All this stuff is stored in DynamoDB. And then as you click on them, it plays them down below, and you can hear the summary or go to the full article. So I'll show you guys how this works before I dive into the cool tech. So here's an example here. Let's say I want to search for Bitcoin again. And I want to play this one.
Independent. Bitcoin is too volatile to replace gold.
And so if I want to read this along with it, you know, I can, and you know, learn all about what I want to learn, and I'm processing these all on the fly every single day. So I think in the database now there's like 120, 130,000 articles that I process through. All this stuff again is in DynamoDB and scaled out. So hopefully, you know, soon we'll start generating a lot of traffic to use all that stuff. If anyone has any questions too, feel free to interrupt. Yeah, sure.
So how do you pick the articles that you summarize?
So I use an API called, it's literally called News API, and they have a ton of different news sources. Those news sources have all their recent articles, and so every 2 hours, I process through just tons of articles, and then do all the summaries, turn the text into speech, and all that sort of stuff. So that was a quick demo. It's really simple, but you can go on your phone and play around with it. It's pretty cool. So getting on to the multi-region aspect. Well, first, who's all familiar with Amazon, or who uses Amazon? Is anyone? Okay, so everyone knows API Gateway and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So API Gateway is pretty cool. It can be created in 2 different modes. They just released the regional mode recently. So by default, it's always going into Edge optimized mode. But when you're thinking about multi-region or regional mode, it'll give you lower latency. And then you can also use Route 53 to then route to the, the correct API gateway that you want that's in that region. And so API gateway, if you don't do the regional mode, it also has obviously the edge optimized mode, and then you can point to lambdas in any region that you want. So if you know where your customers are coming from and they come into Route 53, you're doing some sort of latency routing or you're doing regional routing, you could still say, hey, this path that you're going to go to, I want you to go to lambdas in a different region. And then since Route 53 can do latency and geo, and you could create your API gateway in regional mode, you can have 5 or 6 different API gateways in every single one of the regions that you want, and based on your Route 53 rules, you could send them directly to those for the lowest latency possible. And like I said, lambdas can be deployed in each region. And then DynamoDB, I guess the hardest thing for everyone is scaling your databases. So we've probably all had a company that's like, yeah, I need a failover in a whole different region. And you're like, okay, cool, well I'll do that, but it's going to cost you a ton of money. It's going to be super complex. But with DynamoDB, they just announced global tables, which is multi-region, multi-master. So it doesn't matter where you propagate that out to, and it doesn't matter where that write record comes in. So if the write record comes in Ohio, it'll get replicated out to all the other regions, and then they'll have a quorum against each other, and then once that record is good, then it's ready. So it doesn't matter where it comes from. From before, we're used to like MySQL, where it's one write and then like 3 reads. You got to make sure you write to the one write, and you can't have them anywhere else. So this is really cool that DynamoDB has that.
How long does the resolution take?
That I don't know. I would imagine really, really quick.
I guess for the global tables, you have to drop your existing tables and then create a new one as global. You can't really migrate your existing tables to.
Yeah, that's correct. So a problem with DynamoDB global tables is that you need to start with an empty table. So if you have a database already, you have to start with an empty one. But they announced backup solutions, which I'm pretty sure you can create an empty table and then put your backup back into that table. Which I ran into that issue too.
So are these tables writable?
Yeah, and any region that you want. Write in one region, replicates the other, write in a different region, replicates out to all of them.
Having to do that manually 10 years ago?
Yeah. Well, and so people were doing that manually even with DynamoDB. So with DynamoDB you can have hooks when something's new, something's updated, something's deleted. People were having that call a Lambda function, then that Lambda function was then writing it to all the other regions. So now it's all automatic. So going along that same trend, as far as log aggregations, CloudWatch is really good for that. So with Lambdas, Lambda will create the CloudWatch log group. With those log groups, you could stream that data anywhere you want. So whether you want to stream it to another Lambda function, you want to stream it to an Elasticsearch service, which I'll show you guys a little bit later. You can grab your logs from any of the regions all in one place. And then, obviously, we're all familiar with CloudFront, storing or caching anything. I do some stuff with CloudFront where API Gateway has a way to add CloudFront inside of it, but I run my own CloudFront so I can have custom origins and all that sort of stuff, take a little bit more control of that, and route people in different places. And then, has anyone heard of Lambda at the Edge? Okay. So Lambda at the Edge is super cool. You can run Lambda as a webhook inside of CloudFront, and it runs at globally, across all their different edge points. So whether it's a viewer request, viewer response, origin request, or origin response, you have 4 different webhooks. And I'll show you one of them that I actually use for Audify to collect play analytics. And then really, any service that supports more than one region, as long as you set up your code right, you can really scale out to any region and then just cache everything, which is what I try to do for Audify. I guess that looks okay. So here's an example of when you go to app.audify.fm, what's actually happening. So right now I have Route 53. You hit a CloudFront distribution, which has different caching rules based on which endpoints you're going to hit. That goes out to API Gateway, which then hits a set of Lambda functions depending on what you want to do. Those Lambda functions all write their logs to CloudWatch logs, which then get picked up by a stream from Elasticsearch. And then they grab their data from Dynamo and send that back out. And then here on the left-hand side, there's another CloudFront distribution for all the static assets, so the MP3s, all that sort of stuff. And then there is an edge viewer request from Lambda at the edge, which calls a Lambda function, which writes some play analytics into SQS, which is then processed later on and dumped back into DynamoDB. So all of this stuff here can be done. You can basically take this piece and replicate that across any region that you want. And then based on your Route 53 records, you could say, hey, if you're coming from South America, well, I want to route you to that region, or I want to route you to the US West or US East. So really, you could take this piece and replicate it out. Any questions on that? And then how I get all those news APIs and all the articles, same thing, it's all serverless. So I have a CloudWatch rule that runs every 2 hours, calls a Lambda function, grabs all the news, sends that back to Lambda, uses Amazon's Poly to do the text-to-speech, stores it in Dynamo,
How do you like
writes
that?
the MP3 to S3.
How would you rate Poly? Is it pretty awesome, or?
It's awesome after you play around with it a little bit. So you have to do different things with pitch shifting, and you have to pick the right language based on the things that are the right speech sound, and you have to know when to put pauses in. Otherwise, some things gets a little gnarly. But so far, it's been working out really, really well after some tuning. So some of the frameworks that I use to get all this done, we're all probably familiar with the serverless framework. It does a lot of, is anyone not familiar with the serverless framework? Everyone's pretty much used to it. So it does a lot of the heavy lifting for the code deployments. Bless you. But some of the cons that I think it has, which I supplement with Terraform, is it relies too heavily on CloudFormation, which I think can be accidentally destructive, and a good example of that is I was managing my DynamoDB tables through Serverless, but what I didn't realize was I changed the name of my DynamoDB table, and I did a serverless deploy, not knowing that it was going to nuke my entire table and then recreate a new one. And there was no way for me to say, like, hey, what's the changes that I'm about to make? If anyone knows the way to do that with the serverless framework, which I didn't think there was. So it can be very destructive. It was destructive with IAM roles, and there's a lot of issues there.
You're talking about Serverless or Terraform?
It was scary, especially because like early on when I was building this, I had 10, 20,000 records processed, and we were using that to develop it and build this thing. And then I nuked it all, without knowing. And I wasn't creating backups because I was still just developing. And that's pretty slow to deploy too. And I don't know if that's a CloudFormation thing, if that's a serverless thing, if that's uploading my code to Lambda. I'm not sure, but I always found it a little bit sluggish to deploy. Yeah.
So what is Terraform?
So Terraform does infrastructure management. So you write your infrastructure as code, and I'll sort of show you guys how that works. Seems to be kind of an industry standard. It's it's just like CloudFormation, but it's open source and has a lot of different flexibility. You can actually say what's about to happen before I actually go and apply this, before I nuke my entire DynamoDB table, cry and have to reprocess everything. But some of its cons is it doesn't have new features immediately, which CloudFormation does. So when Amazon released global tables, Terraform did not have, and I don't think it has that support yet. So some of those things you have to do a little bit manually until that support comes out.
Terraform was written in Go.
Yeah. Which goes awesome. So here's an example of the serverless framework YAML files, which as of like 3 days ago, they released a way for you to process these with actual JavaScript. So like a JS file, you can build your YAML files. So this is just an example of mine. For one of my API endpoints, I think it's getting all the news sources. So I exclude some things. I have to do some tricky stuff with compiling async await node code into transpiling it using Babel into ES6 so that it goes up into Lambda. So there's some weird stuff over there happening. But you set your provider, whether that's Amazon, Google, Microsoft, what have you, and then you specify the function, and at the end there, the event that is triggered is an HTTP call to the path/sources, and it's a get. So pretty simple stuff. And then serverless is great because you can do all sorts of authentication. You can authenticate with different providers. They have a lot of different examples of that. And then you specify your runtime, your memory, your timeout, all that sort of good stuff. Does it all for you.
Do you have any kind of authentication and authorization for users in your app?
I have one small thing for anyone who's going to integrate with me, which is just an API key that has to be passed through on the header. But we'll be rolling out actual auth with Auth0 and API gateway. Probably the next one.
Have you ever done anything with Cognito?
I started to and then I stopped because it was a pain. It just seemed kind of kludgy, and I went on.
How long ago was that?
A month ago.
Okay.
I
love it, but everybody has a different experience. So.
Oh, well, maybe you can do a talk on that.
Yeah, okay.
That would be great. Maybe you can change my mind. Because I was at reInvent, I went on a lot of talks about Cognito, and I was like, okay, that sort of makes sense. And then I get back at it, and I'm like, wow, I don't really like this. So talking about Terraform, I have basically an ops repository of sort of my global Terraform and how I set up my entire Amazon account. So the whole AWS account for Audify is all Terraform. So whether that's my VPC, my network, stuff that the serverless framework obviously doesn't do. But some things serverless does do that I still augment in Terraform, which is my DynamoDB tables, things like CloudWatch log groups, S3, a lot of different things that I augment with Terraform. And then here's a cool example of what one record looks like for the playlists inside of DynamoDB. So with Dynamo, since it's NoSQL, you're storing a key value. And then you can also have different indexes too, so you can have your key values in different ways. And then you store a bunch of properties inside there. So my key is going to be that hash key on top, which is basically a hash of the URL. And then the rest of the data in there is basically properties. Deploying with serverless. This is just a quick example. I try to run everything isolated in a Docker container. I could install serverless locally on my computer, but I wanted to pin things to a specific version. So all I do when I go to deploy my code is I type make deploy. It runs serverless inside of a Docker container for the stage that I want with my AWS profile, and then the key is in the region too. So when you want to talk about doing multiple different regions, with serverless, it's super easy, at least the way I have it here. I can just specify any region, and then off my code goes. And I've deployed to US West or US East.
Do you want to talk about security and why you have conceal on that command line? Because that's a little gotcha that some people miss sometimes.
Yeah, so the conceal for hiding any the secrets and stuff.
On the output?
Yep. So conceal hide any of your secret keys or anything like that. And I do verbose too because I want to make sure that I can trace back and see what's actually happening when I do the serverless deploy, so I don't accidentally nuke anything. And if you comment out all of your functions inside of serverless YAML, it'll also nuke your API gateway too, which is not really fun. Yeah.
So why is Docker involved in this?
So I run this locally on my laptop.
Oh,
So when I go to deploy, it's simply if someone else is going to develop with me, I want to make sure that they're going to run the same serverless version is what I have deployed out there. So if they were running something different locally, something could screw up, with the serverless template, and I didn't want that to happen.
Don't you have something called SAM which you can run locally too?
Yeah, I've heard of that. I haven't tried that out at all. Yeah. And then I'll show you some codes. So I'm not going to go too crazy into code or anything, and I just wanted to show you just a quick sample of what some code looks like that I shoot up to Lambda. So here's an example of a feature we're going to be rolling out called playlists, where you could say, hey, these are the news sources that I'm interested in, and maybe these are the tags that I'm interested in, and we're going to build a playlist for you and curate your content. And so all that happens here, and let me jump over to the serverless YAML file. Let's look at playlist. So get playlist. Really, really simple. I'm giving it a name. The IAM role that I generate with Terraform, I'm assigning that to this particular Lambda function. Since I have to use Babel to transpile my async await stuff in Node.js, that's why you see Babel/routes get playlist. A little bit of memory, timeout, and then that /playlist off of my API is what you're going to end up calling. And that essentially just runs a small little JavaScript function that makes a DynamoDB call and returns back the playlist to you. So really, really simple code. I mean, I have a couple of helper functions in there, like responses, little helper function, but it's no more than 10 or 15 lines of code. So you can really do a lot of stuff with Dynamo and with Lambda. Very little code. So some things that are worth noting when building out your API for multi-regional stuff. Lambda at the edge is super cool. So these are the things that I was talking about. You have the viewer request that comes in. So on the viewer request for myself, every time you play an MP3 on Audify, I'm grabbing things like your IP address, where your location is, all of a CloudFront webhook, storing that in Dynamo or in SQS, and then ingested by Dynamo for analytics later on. You can make a hook off the origin request, so when it goes to your origin server, from the origin response and the viewer response. So there's so many things you can do in all the different regions to capture analytics or do some DDoS protection for your API. But some gotchas, it has package size limits, so you can only do 1 megabyte of zip inside of your Lambda function if you're going to do Lambda at the edge. Time execution limits, you can only do 5 seconds for viewer requests, which bit me in the butt a couple times because Lambda has a little slow spin up time. So when my MP3 request would come in, it would take too long for Lambda to spin up after a fresh deploy, and we'd have a failed playback. So something to look out for. And then also it says there, some heads in the way, but be careful when you create your Lambda at the edge, because if you don't create a custom origin, it's just going to say every file inside of your bucket that someone tries to access, I'm going to also call Lambda. And if that's not your desired functionality, then you can end up calling your Lambda function a ton of times. So I store all sorts of different photos and MP3s, and I just wanted the MP3s, and for a while there I was slamming Lambda with requests, because it was loading all the little pictures and calling the Lambda at the edge from that too. So have a custom origin there. And then cut off a little bit at the edge. But just as I said, some of the limits there that you have to be careful with: 5 seconds, origin requests, you have 1 megabyte, including the headers in the body, 1 megabyte of the package size, all that sort of stuff.
Is it a little bit ironic that at the edge is off the edge?
Yeah. And then API gateway. Personal preference, I manage my own CloudFront distributions, and let me just show you with API gateway here. You can create your own custom domain names. And when you do this, obviously you can specify edge optimized or regional. This will create a CloudFront distribution behind the scenes for you. But from what I can tell, I couldn't do anything with that CloudFront distribution. I couldn't create any custom origins for myself. I couldn't do any sort of special caching if I wanted to have certain ones with a different TTL than other ones. So I ended up creating my own CloudFront distribution that fronts my API. But this is still really cool if you kind of want the hands-off approach.
Have you used the HTTP proxy integration with API Gateway?
I haven't, no.
Yeah, basically, if you want to make it even easier than it already is,
yeah,
you can map all of your endpoints to one API Gateway endpoint.
Oh, that's kind of smart. That's really cool. And I think I've played with that before, with just adding like someone else's API or something, but I never thought of it in that way. That's really interesting. So a couple other things too. Authorizations can get quite complex. So whether you're doing API keys, you're trying to integrate with Cognito, you're trying to integrate with Auth0, that sort of stuff gets a little bit hairy, and I'm, still trying to work through some of the different pain points and choosing the right solution for the problem. But Serverless Framework has a lot of cool examples in their little examples repository that you can go through. Canary deployments are really cool. So you can say, hey, I only want 20% of my traffic to start going to this new update that I'm going to push out, and then slowly roll the rest of the traffic out there. That was something new that they released within the past few months. And there's also so much to configure. Like, there's just a lot of stuff in API Gateway, whether you want to change how the methods work, or you want to change the headers, you want to change what the responses are based on the HTTP status code. There's so much stuff in there, and not all of it's super well documented, as a lot of Amazon stuff is. So you just have to play around with it.
And it'll be different in 2 weeks anyways.
It'll be different in 2 weeks. Yeah, they'll have a new thing. So I'll be rolling out logging from my API Gateway too. So the same thing with my Lambda functions, where I'm streaming my logs to CloudWatch. API Gateway can do that as well. So you can grab all those logs, put them in CloudWatch, and then stream them somewhere else. So you can have that to analyze later. DynamoDB, while it's super cool, some of the gotchas that I ran into, obviously there's no auto-incrementing IDs, so if you wanted to try to come up with something like that for yourself, you have to roll it on your own. I found filtering and pagination to be relatively annoying. I don't know if anyone else has gone through some of the pain points.
You really have to plan ahead.
Yes, and I was not planning ahead, so when I started to implement pagination, I have to do not weird stuff, but you filter by different keys and all that sort of stuff.
And
So,
a caching layer is a really good option to consider because then you're not having to deal with all of this.
oh,
Because
interesting.
like my experience is if you really need to do a bunch of filtering and querying,
Yeah,
you probably don't want to do it.
interesting. So how do you do it with the cat? Where do you cache?
Well, I mean, you would just build a caching layer,
Got it.
Elastic cache, whatever,
Right,
and then you could basically go directly against that and have a lot more flexibility because with this,
Yeah,
you have to set up your indexes properly,
yeah,
or you're going to pay out the ass because now you're doing table scans.
yep, exactly.
And it's
Yeah.
slow.
And that was the one thing, so he just mentioned table scans. There's two different ways to get data out of Dynamo. There's scanning and there's querying. So scanning is going to look through all of your records. So when you have really large DynamoDB tables, that's going to be really expensive to do, and that's going to make your costs go way up. But then there's querying, which is great, but it only grabs a certain amount of records. So in my case, it's only grabbing maybe 1,000 at a time, or it'll grab, I can't remember, it's like 10 kilobytes or something small. So whatever that maximum is, that's how many you can return back. So if you're trying to filter on something, we had a bug in Audify, I called it the Oprah bug because we found it when I tried to search for Oprah, where it was only returning 2 or 3 news articles, and I'm like, I have 100,000 in here. There's got to be an article on Oprah, and I'll show you right now, and I'll show you the problem with it. So if I go to search for Oprah, we didn't get any search results. So in this case, within the past 1,000 records that DynamoDB queried, and I have it actually go through a few more, there wasn't a news article from Oprah. So unless I switch to doing a scan and going through the entire table with the tags that I have, I might not find something on Oprah. So the Oprah bug still sort of exists until I decide to spend a little bit more money on that. Yes, filter pagination is annoying. It's easy to max out on your read-write capacity. I've done it tons of times, and when you're not paying attention, you don't actually know that that's the problem. So when I was ingesting a bunch of news articles, I was trying to do some other lookups inside of Dynamo, and things were failing, and I'm like, why is Lambda failing? And console logging out my code, but it was actually DynamoDB reaching its capacity and timing out. When you're building secondary indexes, really cool, but they also have to have provision capacity, so it just adds that much more money onto the bill. And then adding a secondary index to a large database takes a freaking long time if you needed to go across all your different records. So for me to go across 50 or 60,000, it took a little over an hour for a secondary index.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding maxing out the read,
Yep.
right? So since we are using lambdas, they can scale out.